is the real crisis that we have to prevent from happening. And I'm convinced that if I'm not in the Senate, it will happen, because there's nobody there that has a clue what's going on. And if they do, they don't care, because all they care about is getting reelected. And the only way to get reelected is to try to postpone the pain until after the next election. Well, we can't keep doing that. We got to bite the bullet on this. We got to deal with these problems. We just can't keep making them worse so that we can get reelected. And that's what is different about me. I mean, as I said, I'm not a politician. I'm not going to Washington because I want to be there. I would rather be in Connecticut. If politicians had done a good job, then I wouldn't be running. But I understand that they're never going to do what needs to be done because it's not politically popular. And the country is changing. I think the mood of the country is changing. I think there's a lot of people now that understand that the government is the source of our problems and that we really need dramatic change. I mean, I've felt this way for a long time. I mean, you go back, I was born in Connecticut, but I went to mostly college and high school out in California. But I went to UC Berkeley. And as a freshman at UC Berkeley, I had a poster, life-size poster of Ronald Reagan in my dorm room. And that wasn't, the greatest place to have a poster of Ronald Reagan. And it was, I was an 18-year-old kid, and I'd bring girls up to that dorm room, and I'd end up, instead of the night going the way I wanted to, I'd end up having a political argument. And so, it goes way back, and I supported Ron Paul when he ran for office. It was the first guy running in the Republican Party that I actually thought got it, other than Reagan, until he came along. But now I think there really is an opportunity for somebody like me, somebody who really is committed to shrinking government and abolishing a lot of these departments, because you need a crisis. Things have to get really bad before people are really willing to listen to the truth. And I think that there's been enough of the politics as usual, enough politicians, coming and repeating these same old lies, that people are finally fed up with hearing them. And there's actually an opportunity now for somebody like me, right? They're coming from business, right? My business, I've been in the investment business my entire life. I started my my investment firm out of my apartment. I started a one-bedroom apartment in downtown Los Angeles. Before I did that, I worked at Lehman Brothers. I worked at a major firm, and I didn't like it. I just thought that the average guy was not getting a fair shake, and so I wanted to start my own firm. And early in my career, I noticed the NASDAQ bubble. I mean, I saw what was going on, and while all my friends were making a lot of money selling people internet stocks, I was spending every day cold calling people, trying to get them to sell those internet stocks. And it wasn't an easy thing to do because nobody wanted to do it. Nobody wanted to hear the truth. No one didn't want to hear that they couldn't get rich owning these companies. But ultimately, that paid off because I got a lot of credibility. I really built my firm on the reputation I gained by accurately calling the meltdown in the dot-com stocks and getting people out of those stocks and getting my clients into sound investments. And then I did the same thing when in 2002, 2003, when I saw the mistakes that the Fed was making. I knew the problems that they were creating. I was writing op-eds in newspapers in 2004 about the housing bubble and how it was going to burst. I was writing about the problems in adjustable rate mortgages, the problems at the rating agencies, at the appraisers, the problems at Freddie and Fannie. I mean, I had the thing nailed back then. I knew it was going to be a disaster. I wrote a book called Crash Proof, How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse, came out in February of 2007, which laid out exactly what was going to happen to the economy and to the mortgage market. I started going on national television in 2005. I was on CNBC, I was on Fox, I was on CNN, I was on Bloomberg. I was on basically every week, saying that we were going to have the biggest recession since the Great Depression, 10% unemployment, that the housing bubble was going to collapse. I was arguing with realtors on television that real estate was going to drop 30 to 50%, that Fannie and Freddie were going to go bankrupt. I mean, I was saying all this stuff, and people thought it was impossible, that nothing that I was saying could possibly be true. And then all of it happened. So I have a lot of credibility, not only in building a business, but in understanding economics, understanding global economics, and understanding regulation. I understand firsthand how regulation inhibits and interferes with the growth of businesses. I am dealing with regulators breathing down my neck at this point. It is so difficult to stay in business in the financial industry now. I've got, I think, 7 employees, maybe now an 8th. I might have just hired somebody. All they do is comply with government regulations. That's it. I don't employ them for anything else other than to keep me compliant. My legal bills right now per year are more than I used to make 5 or 6 years ago, and that's just my legal bills. And all the legal bills are to help me navigate with the regulators so that I can comply with all their rules and regulations. But those rules and regulations don't do anything to protect my customers. I mean, we don't need any of those rules. My customers are protected by my own integrity and by my own desire to maintain my brand, to maintain my goodwill, to maintain the value of my firm. And I'm no different. I mean, almost every businessman is the same. Businesses care about their customers a lot more than the government does. You know, the customer's always right. The customer comes first. Yeah, there might be a few bad apples out there in business, just like there are in every walk of life. I mean, there's more of them in government than there is in business. But we can't think that we need the government to protect us from everything and just go overboard with all these regulations that make it so difficult to stay in business. I mean, look, did all these rules and regulations stop Bernie Madoff? No. He stole $50 billion right out from under the nose of these regulators. And if anything, I think the fact that Bernie Madoff was audited by the SEC, audited by FINRA, that gave people a false sense of confidence that he was legit. I think if the government wasn't involved and we had to do more of our own due diligence, he never would have pulled this thing off. So I understand the problems that government creates. I understand how government inhibits businesses because they're doing it right now. I mean, I have about 100 employees. I'm sure I'd have 200 employees if the government would have left me alone. But they don't do that. So someone has to go to Washington that not only understands business, but understands economics. And my business is economics. It's understanding how government regulations and taxes and spending, how it interferes with the economy, how it inhibits economic growth. Because I look around the world and I try to find the countries where the governments are not interfering as much, where the monetary and fiscal policies are sounder, and then that's where I invest. But if we can simply reform Washington and change the policies there, then maybe this will be a place that we can save and invest. Because that's what we need to do. As I said at the beginning, we are in a gigantic hole. Right? We have recklessly borrowed and spent trillions of dollars because of government policy that enticed us into doing it. The only way we're going to have a sound economy again is if we change all that. We need sounder monetary policy. We need the government to shrink dramatically. We need to shrink spending so that we can lower taxes, lower regulations, so that we can start making things again, so that we can start producing things again and have a real economy. It's not just some phony economy based on consumer spending and debt. So we have to send someone to Washington who's willing to bring that about and make the hard choices. You know, it's not easy for these politicians to vote for all this because they're always afraid that if they do that, they're not going to get reelected. Right? Well, I don't care if I get reelected, so I can do that. And I want to go to Washington and try to lead a real revolution in the Republican Party and to get them to act like Republicans. I mean, it's very difficult, you know, for someone who really is philosophically conservative to even be in government because we don't like government. We don't want to be there, right? The liberals have a great time there because they love government. They think government's the answer to every problem. They want to grow government. But the problem is we send conservatives to Washington, but they're actually politicians. And so the ideology interferes with the politics. If they want to stay in office and perpetuate their career, they have to do what they need to do, which is make government bigger. So they can expand their power base, so they can make sure that they can stay in office. So we need to send somebody like me that doesn't even want to be there in the first place, that's going to go there and convince the other senators to stand up for the country, for truth, and to put their own political aspirations aside. To say, look, it's okay if they don't get reelected. It's not the worst thing in the world to have to be in the private sector. You know, you can work for a living. So I want to get, if I can get 40 other senators to stand with me, we can filibuster. We can filibuster the raising of the debt ceiling. I mean, that's the first thing that I want to do is make sure that debt ceiling never gets raised again. They just raised it to 12 trillion. I don't want them to 14 trillion from 12 trillion. I don't want it going any higher. And if we can just stop the debt ceiling from getting raised, they have no choice. They have to cut spending. There's nothing else they can do. Legally, that's all they can do. They can try to raise taxes, but if we can filibuster the increase in the debt, well, then we can filibuster the tax hike. So they can't do it. And if I'm in the Senate, I can do that. They can't spend, and they can't tax. All they can do is cut.